Grade 4s. Now we are looking at N.S.T and we're specifically looking at animal habitats, which is a bit of a recap, and animal shelters. So just quickly a recap of what we did yesterday. Habitat is a place where the plant or an animal gets what it needs to survive. This means that they need to get food, they need to get water, they need to get shelter to survive from their habitat. And they need shelter for protection. So they need to be able to protect themselves from danger. They need to be able to have their young to reproduce, to have babies, and keep those babies safe until they're old enough to leave the nest or leave their mothers and fathers. Another very interesting word that hasn't really come up before is indigenous. And indigenous means that you find this particular thing naturally in South Africa or in any particular place. So if I say the white rhino is indigenous to South Africa, it means we can find them naturally here. Then we recap the fact that we have 4 habitats that we learnt about: grasslands, open areas with lots of grass and trees; forest, lush, cool, shady, lots of rain, lots of trees; sea, which we remember was salt water; and river, which was mostly fresh water. So that's a quick recap of habitats. Moving on to shelter, this is one of the things that they need from their habitat, and the shelter needs to keep them safe. They need a place where they can reproduce, we mentioned. In nature, many animals build their own shelters. Some find little caves that they can find naturally, like a bear might go and find a cave to go and hibernate in for the winter, but most animals build their own shelter. Humans have a look at nature and they get ideas from nature. But before we go into that, we need to know, well, what's the point of a structure? Why do we have a structure? 3 main reasons. 1, to hold things. 2, to span a gap. In other words, to get from one area to another where there's a bit of a gap. You can't just walk from one place to the other. And the 3rd reason is to enclose, to protect things, to close things up, to put something inside of something else, or to protect it so it doesn't get damaged. Shelters and structures can be made from different materials, and they can be natural or they can be man-made. As I said, nature inspires man. So we have a look at a bird, and a bird puts its eggs into a beautiful little bird nest that it's built, and we go, you know what, that's a good idea. Eggs are quite fragile, we don't want it to break, so we'll create an egg box. We don't just put eggs all into one basket and sell them at the shop like that. We put them into an egg box. So each little egg has its own little hole to protect it, to enclose it. We look at a spider web, and a spider web goes from one point to the other where you can't just walk across. And we think, oh, that's a good idea. And so we build a bridge. That gives us ideas for the bridge. When we're looking at structures, there are 2 main types of structures: shell structures and frame structures. First, we're going to look at a shell structure. And the main thing that you need to remember now is, think of a seashell. It's hollow. Okay, sometimes it has little crabs in it or whatever the case is. Some little animals go and live inside of a shell, but it protects something on the inside. So when you think of shell structures, think of a seashell. Think of the fact that it's hollow and that you can put something inside of it. Okay, some examples: natural shell structures, swallow's nest or bird's nest, a beehive, a tortoise shell. These are all hollow things that something else goes into it. Okay, a swallow goes and sits inside of its nest. The bees go into their hive. The tortoise is inside of its shell. When we think of man-made, we think of baskets. We can put things into the basket. Pencil cases, we put our pencils into the case. Cupboard, we might put clothes or cutlery or crockery into a cupboard. Okay, shell structures are hollow. They hold, they protect something. I can put something into my shell structure. Then we look at a frame structure, and here we're thinking of many stiff parts joined together, often tubes, beams that have gaps or spaces between them. Now, here I want you to think about, in the playground, they have those jungle gym type things, okay? It's lots of poles put together. That's a frame structure. It creates a frame. So shell is hollow, you can put things into it. Frame is lots of beams put together, joined together. In nature, we think of the spider web, okay? Lots of pieces of the spider web silk that's joined together to make a beautiful pattern. Man-made, we're thinking of a bicycle. Think of all the rods that get put together to create the frame of a bicycle. The electricity pylons, those big electricity poles, okay, those big metal structures. A pig pen, okay, if you think of a fence, lots of pieces put together to enclose the pigs in the pen. kinds of questions that you're going to be asked in this section. And this is quite a big section. It seems quite simple, but it's quite a lot that's in this section. Your teacher could ask you what a habitat is. They could say, well, why is a habitat important to an animal? Remember things like food, shelter, protection, etc. We could say, why is a shelter specifically, not just the habitat, why is the shelter important? And then we're thinking of protecting their young, protecting themselves from danger. You might be asked the difference between natural and man-made structures. You might be asked how nature inspires man. So what ideas did we get from nature to create something man-made? You might be asked the difference between a shell and a frame structure. Now there you have to give a definition. So shell is a hollow structure that protects something or holds something, whereas a frame is a structure that has many stiff parts joined together and often tubes or beams that have gaps or spaces in between them. And then they might say to you, okay, well, give me an example of two shell structures. You might also be given a number of structures and you will have to tell your teacher if it's a shell structure or if it's a frame structure. So there's quite a lot in this little video, quite a lot of things that you have to think about. Think carefully, just picture it in your head. Shell, hollow, protect, put something in it, frame, tubes put together, often stiff parts, and there's gaps in between. Okay, if you can get that picture in your head of the little seashell and of that jungle gym frame, you should be all right. Good luck.